awareness in general, is that I think albinism carried with it, I don't know if I can say, a class-related issue. So people never expected people with albinism to be in high positions because generally we were going through social exclusion, we had issues that of disability, so you can't finish school, or some schools that you're going to do not equip you properly for you to be able to go into the job market, or even in the job market you're not really received that well, or so there were all of these issues, and you found that a lot of the times people with albinism were in economically vulnerable situations. When that changed, I remember that I don't know how many times I've heard it from a deputy minister, I've heard it from producers, where people would tell me how lucky I am that I had an education, or how lucky I am that I can travel, or, it was like, when people wanted me to do something, they always reminded me of my position, like, you are so lucky that you had an education, so how can you refuse to do ABCD? Just an education. You are lucky that you even became a prosecutor. I've literally had that. Some of it is on record, and I think it's because there was a level of class issue related to the oppression and the discrimination of people with albinism. It was the result of the oppression and the discrimination. So now when you move up, there was something that made it confrontational, even to our own people, But I think that with time, and this is the thing, is that things generally change when you have critical mass. So the more people you have in a certain situation, while there's still a minority, if you still have, for instance, just going back to women, if you have women who are not that many women in STEM, there's going to be this level of hostility that just is going to be imposed on their beings. So every time you go to work, you know that you're being questioned. Are you able to do this? Are you able to be a scientist? But the more critical mass you have, the more that perception changes. So I think this is the thing with albinism, even in media. How I started in media in 2012, the narrative and the perceptions have definitely changed right now in 2023, because you also have critical mass. You're having enough people with albinism pop up in different spaces for us to have broader conversations and narratives than what I was experiencing in 2012.
Oh man, I must say you're really a constant champion for matters of self-love.
Thank you.
and self-acceptance, which is very important in so many challenges that we actually encounter in life, So that is why we call the show Happy Days on Podcast, because I always say that happiness is by choice. We always have all challenges that you can name, but it's honestly up to a person to wake up and say, just to face life, how no matter how difficult it is. You find people committing suicide. There are really challenges. You tend to not judge people if they're doing certain things, because you don't know what are they really going through in life. So if you can paint a picture to Umzali out there who's just got a child, and a child is happened to be having a condition of albinism, and in terms of, because I remember when we grow up, I used to hear a lot of people, our elders saying, labantwana abazalwa bakanje, in fact umzali wakhe mangaba akanamali kuba nenkinga, because you need to make sure that you I mean the condition your skin yadura, sunscreen and all that. Maybe what can you say to just a lay parent who doesn't have anything, and then it's like, oh wow, this is what God decided to say He's embracing me with.
I think, if there's one thing I can say, I don't know if I can say, if I can say rest assured. Because one of the things is, again, when I started in 2012, an interesting thing was also happening at the time. There was a UN independent expert that was appointed for matters surrounding albinism. If you look at where albinism is now, you have people who have formed, institutions, task forces to ensure that persons with albinism are actually they have a fruitful future in education, in health, in rights. You know, the fact that albinism now is viewed as a disability also allows persons with albinism to have resources in terms of rights that they never had before, because initially people never considered your sensitivity to the sun or your short-sightedness as a disability. Really, they'd just be like, oh, you know, you struggle with these things, but those things actually affected your day-to-day life. It affected your education, your employment opportunity. It affected all of those things. So now you are in a position where you can even get grants, etc., because you have people who are fighting for this thing. You know, when I started in 2012, the independent expert, there's a different one now, but still the mandate is the same. She consolidated everybody. The first time I met Rufilo Mudisen was because of a Nigerian woman who went to the UN and decided that she's going to fight for this mandate to be created. That was the first time I met Rufilo. We were sitting down in a panel. It was the UN consultation phase of the policy discussions on the action plan regarding albinism. She went to every country, to consolidate media, education, law. She consolidated all of us to ensure that as a unit, we actually work towards an action plan locally for persons with albinism. So the first thing is, know that there are people who are fighting for your child to have a fruitful economic, social, cultural future, you know. And secondly is, I do think that, you know, sometimes you read these self-help books and I feel like they're a bit privileged in their views, because I think sometimes we overly place on the person too much weight for them to be you know, happy and feel good and self-love. Yes, indeed, attitudinally you need to have like a very good attitude in terms of your life, because you need to protect your optimism. You need to also be able to believe that the future can improve. It's a form of sustenance. If you start believing that the future cannot improve, you are not sustaining yourself. That's why you will start moving into depression. But it is also the resources around us. Who we have in our lives is fundamental.
Very important.
It influences the quality of our energy, our spirit, you know. Like, so as a parent, I would just say, be consistent in being supportive, in being loving no matter what. Be consistent in being a safe space and creating a safe space. And also, you know, there was this thing that, you know, me and my mother used to debate about it. Because, you know, my mother, when I grew up, she wanted me to really find my own way. So she didn't really want me to be part of like albinism organizations. In retrospect, I think she was still right. There's no right or wrong way, you know. But I also think that it is important for you to see other people who have the same experience as you. Otherwise, it may just be too alienating. You know, there are people who now I speak to, who are close friends of mine, who have albinism. They understand my situation or how I need to solve a particular problem better than some other people who are very close to me.
So living in a vacuum
exactly
won't help,
exactly. But also I would say that I would really encourage for you to allow them to have friends who have albinism, but also try to get the range if it's possible. People with different identities, you know, like, so people who have albinism, who don't have albinism, people who have disabilities, people who are queer, people who are whatever. The reason is just people. People in their different lives. Because people in different lives, first of all, they show you different experiences of humanity, but they also show you different ways of approaching the difficulties that just come with life. You know? And I think that kind of exposure helps a child feel so much more grounded. So allow them to meet and see as many different types of humanities as possible. That exposure, I think, is actually fundamental.